Hello, everyone. Your two favorite, most bullish people in the world, perhaps. Myself, Luke Broyles, and of course, my friend and coworker, Peter Dunworth. Peter, thank you for joining me, as always.
Pleasure to be with you, Luke.
Great. So, uh, we got things to talk about. Bitcoin price, obviously, 100K a Bitcoin. It's a number that has been a meme for years, and now it is actually here. And so a lot of people are wondering, are they too late? Are they too late to Bitcoin? Obviously, I think they know the answer is no from watching our videos before, but I think people always like to hear why they're not too late. So I love it, Peter, if we could just touch on that a bit of why people aren't too late. If we could touch on nation state adoption, I think that'd be really useful. And then I really want to get to something that most other people aren't talking about in Bitcoin, which is very concerning to me, and that is regarding irrevocable trust, private placement life insurance, estate planning, inheritance planning, everything to do with protecting your Bitcoin against lawsuits, taxes, key loss, everything like that. Because, I think it's easy for people to say Bitcoin is going to go up, but I think it's much harder for people to say Bitcoin is going to go up, and therefore we have to act like it's going to go up. So I guess before anything else, Peter, what are your reactions with Bitcoin at 100K, and where do you think we go from here?
You know what? It's a day I thought would be a long time coming, and we're here. It's, in a word, underwhelming. The amount of excitement around this number, I'm like, this is not the excitement levels that we've seen in previous all-time highs. When it went through 1,000, it felt like the world was buzzing on it. When it went through, close to 20,000 back in 2017, people were, almost euphoric. And then, previous all-time high, I think, was blunted in 21. Or whatever that year was, that just didn't really hit it. And, here we are at new all-time highs, and, we're nearly knocking on the door of $100,000 a Bitcoin. And the market, to tell you the truth, feels a little bit meh, in a word, would be the perfect description of where we are right now. There's just meh. It's underwhelming. And I think that's probably a testament to, where we think this is going to go moving forward. And I guess it's a function of the market and where we are and how much has happened since all of those milestones, previous milestones, were achieved. So I'm interested to see your thoughts.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely meh. Now, it's definitely more noticeable. Like, I can definitely tell, both anecdotally and looking on chain and stuff, obviously, that, the market definitely is a little bit more excited now than it was when Bitcoin was 90K, even 80K or 70K. I think the it clearly, like, this has been the best sentiment I've seen this year in 2024, besides March of 2024. However, I think people were more fanatic at 70K in March of 2024 than they are right now at 100K, which is still very, to your point, it's a little bit surprising. It's a little bit underwhelming, but, I think it's all the more reason to be optimistic, is that this, like, somebody's buying right now, right? It's like we rocketed from 60K to 90K, and now we're kind of grinding up to 100K or whatever, right? And so, maybe that rocket ship is a little muted right now, but somebody's buying, right? And it doesn't seem to be retail, because that'd be a lot of retail, and the sentiment is not there. So who is it? I mean, is it all Michael Saylor, or what do you think? Like, if the market is as meh as it is right now, like, who on earth is having these volumes, both in Bitcoin price, but then also in hash rate, right? Hash rate also is having screaming all-time highs, so somebody's mining. What do you think about that?
The hash rate is a very interesting one. I think there is a nation-state adoption on this. I think the nations around the world, if they haven't already figured this out, will at some point in time in the future realise that this is a serious asset. It's an infrastructure asset that will need to be looked after from a national interest perspective. And once that happens, that completely redefines the playing field of the Bitcoin miners. And I think it's going to be very difficult being a private Bitcoin miner versus a public utility like a national energy grid customer, or run by the government. Government is grossly inefficient. They've effectively got free power or unlimited resources to to throw at this. So the efficient Bitcoin miners, the listed Bitcoin miners, are going to have, I think, a very difficult time of it moving forward, because they have a cost of capital, and they've got a cost of energy, whereas the nation state miners, they don't have a cost of capital, they don't have any energy cost to it, because they're skimming off the top. Obviously they do, and this is a very simplified version of it, but I look at that and think this is, to me, the reason why the hash rate just continues to go up, because the economics of it don't support what we're seeing. And this is where we've seen the hash rate lead the price dramatically, to the tune of probably 6 months or more. So there's a few things that sort of feel out of kilter to me in that perspective. And then when it comes back to Bitcoin, who's buying that really is anyone's guess, and that's the fun part, is speculating on who has the ability to drive and purchase that much Bitcoin. Is it a sovereign wealth fund? Is it a government? Is it just Michael Saylor issuing his $42 billion in one tranche and going through and just buying $42 billion worth? Obviously, that's not the case, but it's fun to speculate on this. But what we are seeing is a forward trajectory to that place where there is going to be nation state adoption, and adoption from a central bank reserves perspective of Bitcoin. Each day that this sort of buying continues is one day closer to that moment. And that, to me, represents a pivotal moment. That, to me, could be the suddenly in the gradually then suddenly debate.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think my guess, which I think is pretty in line with yours, my guess is that who's buying right now, it pretty much just are these large entities that are like the Michael Saylors of the world just buying, right? I mean, Michael Saylor's had a massive amount of demand for these convertible notes that he's issuing, right? And, I think that, I think that's a sign of things to come. I'm pretty skeptical that the nation state's buying right now, or that the nation state's mining, but I think large entities are starting to place themselves for that, with the expectation that that's coming in the near future, right? Dennis Porter, who, Peter, of course, told me just about a week ago that, he's talking to 10 U.S. states, one of them being Pennsylvania, that one is public, and 4 countries, not the U.S., that are looking to buy Bitcoin, right? And, the first one is a data point, that was El Salvador. The second one is a trend, I guess, which was Bhutan, that announced it a couple years later. And so I agree. I think that's coming. And I do think that is the suddenly moment, right? Because they can print their political currency. We can't, right? You can't, I can't. Nobody watching us can, right? Yeah. So I think
it's funny
on
that point, Luke.
Mm-hmm.
On that point, Luke, what's really interesting to me is you and I, we buy Bitcoin, we're paying 100 cents on the dollar for that purchase. Michael Saylor issues stock and buys Bitcoin. He's paying 30 cents on the dollar for that privilege. So he is incentivized to sell as much stock as he physically can to buy more Bitcoin. And you look at that from a capital efficiency perspective, he's 3.5 times more capital efficient than we are. And then you move that to the central banks when they start buying, they have a zero cost of capital to that purchase. So what happens? How much Bitcoin are they going to be purchasing when it costs them absolutely nothing to purchase with their currency? Like, there's a zero cost of capital for that. I look at that and I think it'll make Michael Saylor's purchases pale in comparison.
Well, yeah. Speaking of pale in comparison, here's just 2 examples, because this is a question I'm getting, especially when people are new, if they're too late, right? Just for comparison. So DocuSign, DocuSign, right, Peter? Of course, we use DocuSign for certain things. Most people watching this, especially in the United States, probably know DocuSign, right? And I'm not hating on them, by the way, right, as a customer of theirs. But Bitcoin is only worth 114 times more than DocuSign. So DocuSign is 1% of the world's pristine collateral. So, to your point with this is like, I just don't think people are ready. It's like everyone's talking about, oh, is Bitcoin going to go to 100K or 150K or 130K or 180K or 200K, 300K, whatever. But it's like Michael Saylor, over the course of 4 years, wants to buy $42 billion of Bitcoin. That dwarfs everything he's done in the past. But it's like America has $42 billion of unfunded liabilities every 40 hours. It's like, hello, right? It's like America could buy $42 billion not in 4 years, but in 4 months or 4 weeks or 4 days. and it wouldn't be like that dramatic for the rest of the world. And Bitcoin, obviously, it would be a vertical candle, though, right? So, I think
Yeah.
it's just, we're so used to crossing our fingers or wondering if we're going to be right that very few of us have actually internalized. Yeah, actually, you were right, and you way undershot how right you were. Right? I love going back to the Bitcoin posts on Reddit from like 2011 to 2014 about predicting someday a $10,000 Bitcoin, and most of them said, "Oh, that'll never happen. Maybe 2030, maybe 2040," and yet here we are. We're 10 times that, and there's still so much more room to go.
Yeah, that's the difficult part. If you haven't been studying Bitcoin or you're new to Bitcoin, the 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 hardest part is dipping a toe in this market, and this is where you look at this, you think it's all time highs. Oh my goodness, I've missed the boat. And what you don't realize that if you're patient and you sit there for 10 years, you look back on this and think that was the greatest investment decision that you ever made.
Right, for sure. Now, as you've probably heard me say many times, Peter, actually, I know you've heard me say this many times, about how I think people grow into different problems when it comes to Bitcoin, right? People start out at a certain
Yeah.
problem. Everyone starts out at the same layer, no matter if they're a billionaire or they have $10 to their name. They start at the bottom layer, which is they think they don't have enough Bitcoin. They think they missed the boat, right? Then they graduate beyond that, and they get over that fear of, oh, I'm too early to Bitcoin. They buy on exchanges. Then their net worth gets to a certain point, their Bitcoin stacking, maybe a couple $1,000s, and they decide, I'm going to upgrade out of exchange Bitcoin into self custody. Then they advance from hot wallets to cold wallets to multi sigs, whatever, all this stuff, right? And I think a lot of people right now, perhaps many people even watching this, are about to graduate to the next point, which I think is the natural point, which is where the people like you and myself, Peter, that are the hyper bulls, right? That are the mega bulls, where people they emerge into this point where they realize not only are they not too late to Bitcoin, but if anything, they might be too early to Bitcoin. And there was so much upside in front of us that inherently means there was also an upside of challenges and hurdles in front of us to keeping that Bitcoin. So in my mind, there are 3 or 4 main threats that comes to people's Bitcoin. Peter, I think we probably have the same ones, but what would you say are the 3 or 4 or 5 largest threats to people holding their Bitcoin?
I think obviously self custody is where statistically speaking, where most coins are being lost. So not ensuring that you have a repeatable backup plan for your Bitcoin. Do you have an estate plan protocol that ensures that even if you're not here, you're able to recover your Bitcoin? And have you tested it? And this is the critical thing that I don't think a lot of people do is they think, oh, great, I've got something in place and I don't want to test it. Some people I don't think want to test it and go through that process because they don't want to know that they maybe don't have the coins that they thought they did. Like, I hate to say it, but we've been through that process with clients where we've gone through and realized what they thought they had, they don't have. I was just with a client 2 days ago, last Friday, and they thought they had Bitcoin on a wallet. We recreated it, spun it up, and there was nothing there. And so that's probably a big fear. I think that's probably the main one, is that a lot of people want to create a system for their Bitcoin self-custody that is so complex that only they can recover it. And the problem with complexity is that complexity precludes others from being able to repeat the process that they can. And the problem with that is oftentimes, the Bitcoiner can't repeat the process that they've created for themselves. So this is where testing this is so critical. And part of one of the greatest joys I have in doing what we do is when we get to meet our client's family and actually go through that process and see everyone in the family have a penny drop moment that, oh my goodness, great, we've sorted this problem out. We don't have to worry about this thing ruining our family's legacy. To me, they're probably the 2 big ones. So obviously not doing a great job or doing such a good job that it's only secure for you. You're unable to repeat the process. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that beyond that.
Well, yeah, I think obviously the big risk everyone in Bitcoin has heard a million times, but yet many people are still ignoring, is not your keys, not your coins, right? So counterparty risk. That seems like a very big threat. But then also to your point with self custody risk, like that's a very big one. I've seen that many times too, where people lose keys or lose coins, right? I think the dilemma here is that many people I talk to, they have everything in one seed phrase, one single sig, and one location or whatever, right? And so then the problem they run into is, well, if I have 100% of my net worth in one location and that net worth is compounding at 60% a year in terms of fiat, that's a little terrifying. Even if it's not terrifying to me, it's terrifying to the wife or the kid or whatever, right? As it probably should be. So then the problem they run into is, well, maybe I should have three single sigs and I have a third of my wealth in each one. But the problem is that there's still single points of failure with those coins, right? You've gone from one single point of failure with all the Bitcoin to now 3 points of failure, each with a third of the Bitcoin. So maybe you reduce the probability of you losing all your money by 2/3, right? But now you've increased the probability of you losing a third of your money by tripling it, right? And so it actually nets out to be essentially the same. And it's still stressful to the wife. It's still stressful to the kid, right? And Peter, as you know, I've seen people go to that extreme.
Yeah.
Like that problem doesn't go away. Bitcoin doubles and doubles and doubles again. And so, I've seen people lose coins all the time, as you have too, as much and more so than me, right? I've seen people lose a tenth of a coin and it devastates them. I've seen people lose dozens of coins, hundreds of coins. I've even talked to people that have lost thousands of coins many years ago, right? And it always hurts. And in some ways, it's almost worse to know you once had it than to have never had it in the first place, right? Like the people that started later in Bitcoin's history that went from one coin to 10 coins are much more grateful than the people that had 50 coins, but then lost 40 of them over the course of 8 years due to lost keys, lawsuits, whatever, hacking, whatever. And so anyway, that's a funny human psychology point because they both end up at the same place, right? They're both millionaires right now, right? With Bitcoin at 100 grand, 10 coin, like they're both millionaires. They're both fine. But yeah, knowing that you once had that, but losing a third of your coins or a tenth of your coins or all of your coins definitely hurts. So anyway, long story short, counterparty risk, self-custody errors. I think also lawsuit, divorce, tax. I think those are a few more that are really important that unfortunately people forget about until it's too late.
Yeah, and that's a big one. Obviously, Australia's not too far behind the US, but the US being the most litigious country on earth, ensuring that you protect yourself from litigation is of huge import, particularly as the price rises. And there's ways and means to do that. I think really important to get ahead of that before it becomes a problem, because the issue is that if you're in a law case, there's nothing you can do to prevent that outcome from happening or to protect yourself. But if you take preventative measures to put that into the structures to help protect yourself, then that is precluded from any future law claim that happens in the future. And so there are ways to protect yourself from litigation. When it comes to divorce, obviously, prenuptial agreement, or alternatively what we just discussed, it may be an avenue to do that. And then the other one that's huge that affects every US citizen, every UK citizen, is estate taxes. And those estate taxes are absolutely they're just huge in impacting the amount of Bitcoin that you're going to leave for your estate. And in the US, you're suffering a tax rate on death of close to 40%. To be fair, with the new administration, that might go down a little bit. But if it was the other administration, there would have been moves to increase that. In the UK, it's 40%, but it could be moved up dramatically. We're fortunate in Australia; we don't have that. But that's a huge hit to your Bitcoin stack on death. That is, you can take legal means to prevent that happening.
Yeah, I think that's a big one. That it's terrifying to me that people haven't thought about that, right? Like us Bitcoiners like to think that we're so paranoid, we hate the government so much, or whatever, and that we're so paranoid on taxes, whatever. But it's like everyone's forgotten the obvious elephant in the room, right? It's like here where I am in America, right? We're less fortunate than you Australians. Like that's 40%, right? Everyone's whining and complaining about some theoretical unrealized capital gains thing. It's like the reality is that 40% estate tax, 40% death tax. I think the reality is that most people don't want to admit that they're going to die. I think that's why we ignore it. But it's like it's the obvious, easy thing to do. Like here in America, you could still have self custody, put the Bitcoin in some sort of trust or estate planning or legal protection to reduce it, and you increase the Bitcoin stack for your kids by 66%. 40% reduction. Inverse of that is a 60%, 65%, 2/3 increase in the number of Bitcoin they're getting. And some people I talk to, Peter, and I know you've seen this too, we've done many calls like this. Some people say, oh, I just won't report it or whatever. But it's like, it's not about you anymore. You're dead. You're gone, right? It's about the kids. Are the kids, like, are they going to want to lie under oath that, oh, yeah, we actually don't have it? And then as soon as they make an on-chain transaction, the government sees that, see they're lying. Like, I don't know. It's just very perplexing to me that so many people, talk about, oh, Bitcoin's going to $13 million a coin. And they just haven't taken, a minute to scratch their heads and say, while we hope the government has less taxes in the future, as it is right now, there's a 40% estate tax. Do I want the first thing that happens to my child or my wife when they inherit this Bitcoin, assuming they find the keys, like you mentioned earlier, Peter, I think that was a good point. But then to assume, even if they find the keys, even if they don't have it stolen from them, even if they decide not to smash sell all at once because they're terrified, they don't know what they're doing, but even if they keep it, then the government's going to take 40% and their only option is give up 40% of those coins or lie under oath for the rest of their lives and run from the law. I mean, I don't know, Peter. I like to think myself as an optimist with Bitcoin number go up, but I'm also a bit terrified with how flippant many Bitcoiners are in the face of that.
I personally think this is where this is a really important conversation to have for many reasons. I think it's just a lot of Bitcoiners don't understand the benefits that operating within the legal system will give them. Benefits to the from an asset protection perspective. It'll also give them benefits from a taxation perspective. It'll help them mitigate estate taxes. The other thing, and this is the flip side of this, is that's say the argument to not telling anyone about it is, I think that probably one of the most important features of Bitcoin is that it is an immutable ledger that everyone can download. And it's like that journal entry will be on the ledger, on the blockchain, in perpetuity, forever. And so this is the funny sort of trade-off that I think the Bitcoiners who don't want to play in the in the realm of this space of full declaration, the rest of it, need to be aware of is that the considerations I think of is that the Bitcoiners that are in this vintage that are making all of their wealth in Bitcoin are going to be the ones who are totally committed to Bitcoin. The people who inherit the Bitcoin aren't going to share the same passion for Bitcoin that, say, you or I have. Our children just, by the very nature of it, won't be as invested as we are in it. Now, what you're asking the second generation to do, if you don't want to declare it, is to become an expert in something that they've got no interest in and to stay ahead of the best technology on earth in finding who owns what on this blockchain. And I look at that and think, with the lack of development on the privacy front from Bitcoin's perspective, you're asking them to stay ahead of the world's best on-chain analysts to find you in perpetuity, forever, because the government has forever to catch you, and you've got to maintain and stay ahead of everything that they can come up with. And to me, that's the wrong side of the equation that I want to work with. I don't want to be on that side because you're forever trying to outrun something that you've got no idea where they're at. And to me, that represents an existential risk to having your, generations of family keep your Bitcoin that you've got.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. And maybe to bring a breath of optimism back into this, it's like, so Peter, obviously, I was the first American at the Bitcoin Advisor. And while I credit that a lot to you for finding me as early on as you did, I also would like to say that I think a lot of it comes back to my initial point, right? My initial little quote-unquote burst on the scene in Bitcoin was talking about how we have less in common with the past and the future. And I firmly believe that. That's why I've always said that. Notice it's not been, the future is better than the present. I'm not saying the future is worse than the present. I don't know if the future is going to be better or worse. I mean, I'm an optimist. I would like to think it's going to be better, but my argument always from day one has been you have less in common with their future and the past. And I think the same thing applies here, right? It's like right now you're a Bitcoiner and you have less in common with the future and the past, right? Yes, with technology, AI, everything else, everything you said, Peter, I think is very in line with that, right? Because you're not just competing against the government as it is now in perpetuity, but you're competing against the government and all the AIs and future technology it has in the future against now, right? So I think there's that component. But then
Yeah.
also it's like the majority of net worth increase for you is in the future, not in the past, right? The majority of AIs coming after you in the future, not the past. The majority of lawsuits coming after you in the future, not the past. The majority of hacks and attacks and attempts to try to get your seed phrase in front of you, not in the past, right? And I think, a lot of people hear me say less income in the future in the past, and they blindly assume that that means relentless optimism. And, I think the reality is that everything is a trade-off, right? And so I think to your point with being trackable forever, I think the benefit of this trade-off is that if you can own a UTXO, you're early. Because the way I like to put it is that UTXOs are the actual dirt of the island of Manhattan. And so if you can actually own a UTXO, like you already are part of the privileged few. Most people will never be able to afford to make a layer one transaction. They just won't be able to. Very, very few people, individual people, will ever be able to do that. And if you've been able to do that, that is how you know you were early to Bitcoin, right? You are buying land in downtown, what will eventually be Manhattan, before there's like a 3-story building made out of wood, right? It's like that's how early you are. Is that people are still doing layer one transactions before we have the economic incentive to build up with layer two, layer three sidechain or whatever, right? So anyway, I just think it's a trade-off that you want to be really, really early to this thing. You own actual UTXOs, but the downside is that they're going to be tracked forever, and people 100 years from now will be studying what you did.
And they'll be able to go back and see how what you've done, what transaction you've done. Were you a good custodian of that Bitcoin? It's funny, I've never heard it put that way, Luke. The analogy like being able to buy land in Manhattan before you could put 2 stories on Manhattan, and now
Right.
we're sitting at 100 plus stories on Manhattan. We're all on the base layer. Like we're literally buying dirt in Manhattan at the moment because we've all got access to it, but everything is yet to be built in front of us. And just by that very simple analogy, it should prove to anyone at the moment who's thinking about Bitcoin that there is absolutely more in front of us than behind us from a returns perspective.
Right. Yeah. I mean, Lightning as an example. Lightning is only 5,200 Bitcoin, right? Like the whole network, Lightning, right? And so it's like people. I hear people all the time wonder if they're too late to Bitcoin in terms of price action, right? And it's like, if we're to think in equivalent terms, we are in about the 1630s in New Amsterdam, on the island of Manhattan, right? And it's like, you're not too late. Are you kidding? The first hotel is not until 1645. We got another 50 years until we're renamed from New Amsterdam to New York. And then we have like another couple hundred years until steel can build a 20-story building, let alone the Empire State Building, right? But yeah, of course, the problem is that if you're buying land, buying the actual dirt in Manhattan, it's like, okay, congratulations, you've now acquired generational wealth. Now you got to protect that intergenerationally forever, not lose it to the guy that's going to show up at your door with a gun, not lose it to the court or to the city that's going to wage all these lawsuits against you, and not to the people in your life that are just going to make things annoying, right? And try to take it, right? So, uh, anyway, so could we talk about solutions to this, and how people can
Sure.
think about protecting this? Because obviously, I think, I think the hard thing too with this is that, let's talk about solutions. Let's talk about something more optimistic. What are easy, tangible steps people can take to ensure that their Bitcoin is protected against counterparties, self-custody errors, lawsuits, and taxes?
I think, for want of a better term, a catch-all or close to a catch-all for this is 2 things. Obviously, to prevent loss on a personal level, I think collaborative security and what we do offers a huge way to minimize the risk in self-custody. It improves OPSEC. It will help reduce risk of $5 rent attacks. There are so many benefits in collaborative security that I think is just a no-brainer to go through, and I'll get you to add to that further if you wish. The other thing is looking at what are the available legal structures that you can take advantage of to benefit from things like protecting you from creditors or predators. What legal means can you make to protect your Bitcoin? Are there ways and means to ensure that you don't have to pay estate taxes on your death. All of these things are sort of incremental changes in your self-custody setup and how you actually hold your Bitcoin, which can have a significant impact on the amount of Bitcoin that you are able to hold through time and, most importantly, leave to your loved ones. And I look at that and think probably the most underrated vehicle for doing that at this point in time anyway is the irrevocable trust that all of you lovely US citizens have got access to. And I look at that and think that solves a whole range of issues for Bitcoiners, that ensures that not only can you avoid the estate taxes, but you can avoid a whole host of other problems that might crop up, such as litigation or lawfare. And in light of what's gone on in the last few years with the madness in the world, these are steps that every Bitcoiner, I think, who's responsible anyway, should be taking to protect their wealth. Because I often talk about that it's a lot easier making the wealth, and it's very difficult holding it through time. It's very difficult keeping it, because once you've got it, there's a whole host of people who want to take that from you. And it's about making good decisions on through time to ensure that you don't fall victim of losing your wealth. And this is where the legal structures that you've got access to in the US, from a global perspective, are outstanding options relative to anywhere else in the world. I look at your irrevocable trust structures and think, I wish we had such structures in Australia, because one of the key benefits I look at for this is, that enables you to transfer CGT free, so capital gains tax free, from your person to an irrevocable trust, and not incur a capital gains tax bill. I look at that and think, that is incredible. I mean, what an opportunity. You get to move your assets from a position of relative weakness because you're totally exposed. You yourself totally exposed to any lawfare that might be taken upon you personally. And for no cost from a capital gains perspective, you're able to move that to a legal structure that's going to give you protection against that. I mean, that sounds too good to be true.
America.
America.
Yeah. The downside with us is that we have pretty onerous taxes, but the upside is that we have enough people in power that we can they are willing to pass the tax code to benefit themselves, right? And so we get to benefit alongside that if we know what we're doing. So I guess to elaborate on that a little bit more. So the irrevocable trust, basically what this means, Peter, if I understand, add on or correct me where I need to, because we're trying to get through a lot of information really quickly here. Irrevocable trust, someone wants to leave coins to their kids, right? Which many people holding Bitcoin want to do, right? They don't want to give it to the state, and they don't necessarily want to lose their keys and give it to the network. They want to give the coins to the kids. Coins are going to the kids. Take the coins. Let's say you bought them at 10K. You put them in the irrevocable trust. You mark up that capital gains up to 100K. So already you've had an intangible benefit of reducing your future tax bill. But when it's in the irrevocable trust, now you're avoiding legally the estate taxes. Therefore, with the Bitcoin within that trust, you're effectively increasing the number of Satoshis per child up by 66%, more or less, by avoiding that 40% capital gains. And in there, you're reducing the incentive for somebody malicious out there to come and take your Bitcoin. And so ironically, even if not all of your Bitcoin are in this trust, you are reducing the total honeypot that they can come after via litigation. And therefore, ironically, the Bitcoin in the trust also is protecting the Bitcoin outside of the trust by reducing the incentive for people to come after it. And then once the Bitcoin is in the trust, avoiding the estate tax, having the capital gains marked up to $13.1 million, which that number is reducing here in the future, which we'll get to that in just a moment. But you're also protecting the Bitcoin outside of it, and you can borrow or live off of the Bitcoin within the trust still in terms of US dollars, which most people are looking to do anyway in the future, right? And so could you talk a little bit about private placement life insurance and the different options available for people within the irrevocable trust that still give them the ability to live on that Bitcoin without having to sell it or give up self-custody at all? That's something we should clarify. None of this requires counterparty risk.
Yeah. I might take a step back, if it's okay, and talk more broadly on life insurance, because I think it's probably important to talk about in this context, just in general terms, so no financial advice. But the importance of life insurance in the US is critical, in that life insurance is typically a capital gains tax-free event. So in the event that you pass away, two things are really important with that. It's capital gains tax free, which is a huge bonus, particularly if that's indexed to the gains of inflation. And secondly, there's no estate taxes on life insurance. So imagine being able to put your Bitcoin into a structure that allows you to take advantage of no capital gains tax and has no estate taxes on your death. To me, that sounds like the holy grail. And this is where I won't go into detail on this because we've got partners, tax partners, attorneys who specialise in this, who we can obviously put you in touch with. But I look at this and think that is literally the holy grail of where you want your assets or what structures you want your assets to be in. You want them in a structure that's protected against any lawfare. You want that to be an environment that is the most that has the most concessional tax environment possible, and no CGT represents that. And at the same time, you also want to preclude any of those gains or future benefits from being taxable from an estate perspective. And I look at that and think, this is what life insurance in Bitcoin does. It enables you to compound through time without any loss. And then the magic of that whole perspective that I look at and think is just absolutely a no-brainer is the ability to borrow from that life insurance at a future point in time. It means that you can access the benefits of that while you're alive. And so that to me represents a structure that is of huge import to any Bitcoiner at some point in time. Whether it's now or later is something that all Bitcoiners will be interested in.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's why it's important to talk about these things, because maybe these things don't matter to people right now, but they will pretty soon. One, because Bitcoin price goes up, and pretty soon every moderate net worth person watching this is going to be a high net worth person watching this. But then the other factor too is, of course, that the United States, not everything is good forever, right? This irrevocable trust specifically is 13.1 million right now that you can mark up the CGT, but we've got a time only that's going to be available that goes down to about 5 million, is my understanding, next year or the end of next year, right? Yeah. So it pays to be informed of all this stuff. Peter, I know you got to go here in a few minutes. We've got plenty to do. I think I've told you this already, Peter. Maybe not, but I had a client reach out to me on Friday. 3 days before recording this, that his stack has now doubled as a result of becoming a client. So he just over doubled. Just over doubled a stack. Obviously, as you know, our average is 51.2% more Bitcoin in the course of the first 12 months. And people often ask, "Oh, how is that possible?" It's like, well, this is how it's possible, right? Is our goal is help you acquire as much Bitcoin as possible, keep it safe for as long as possible, orange pill the family, turn the business into a Bitcoin business, get Bitcoin on your balance sheet, get it on your treasury, reduce the risk of loss, reduce the risk of taxes, all these things. And so the average is 51.2%. Now, obviously, that will get less beneficial over time, right? Maybe in a year that's only 40% than 30%. It gets more difficult to help people buy more Bitcoin as price goes up. But, this is how we do it. And on the flip side, Peter, as you know, we've had many calls, one recently in particular, where, once the bad thing happens, it happens. Once somebody reaches out and says, "Oh, I lost the seed phrase," or "Oh, I had the paper served," or "Oh, the person died," or "Oh, the divorce happened," or "Oh, this, that, the other," insert the bad thing, whatever it was. "Oh, I forgot the pin." "Oh, the device died," it's pretty hard. Those are the hardest moments. So I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but that's just my big emphasis for people, is that the most expensive thing in your life right now is opportunity cost dwindling away. And so it makes a lot of sense to hire somebody to help you maximize that opportunity cost when it's still in your favor. And then the other thing too is just downside risk is not to be messed with, because once the bad thing happens, once the papers are served, once the person is gone, the asset's in trouble. And at that point, there's nothing to be done.
No, that's the problem. So I think the most important part is take action, whether it comes to any of the things that we talked about, look, you do a great job of spending an inordinate amount of time with clients, going through these things in detail. The most important thing we can do is obviously educate people that these things are available, they're out there, they should be taking advantage of it. It's much better taking advantage of it when it's at these prices than when it 10x's from here. And there's going to be a lot of people listening to this right now who, when Bitcoin goes to, the prices that we think it does, those $13 million caps, that could be achieved if, you look at Michael Saylor's prediction with one Bitcoin.
Right.
So actioning this sooner rather than later is really important because it's going to preserve more of your wealth through time. So I look at that and think that to me is of utmost importance, is taking action, at least making a phone call.
Right. Yeah, that's what I encourage everyone to do. Please reach out. Please make a phone call. Book a time. Information link down below. I know 90% of people watching this will not do that, but that's okay because they will in a year or two when they realize they need this. Peter, as we wrap up here, obviously our business, Bitcoin Advisor, obviously we don't get that many complaints because we have a 100% success rate after nearly a decade in business. Since 2016, not a single client has ever lost a single Satoshi under our partnership with them. Despite hundreds of clients and hundreds of millions of dollars of Bitcoin. So obviously we don't get many complaints in regards to that because we're pretty obsessed about this. But we do get a lot of complaints that we're pretty expensive. And so my question, Peter, is 0.5% service fee expensive for everything that we've outlined today, plus many, many more things which we don't have time to get into? Is that expensive like many people seem to think it is?
I'm probably a little bit biased here, but I'd say not. And this is where I think one of the things that's really important to think about is if you want to achieve the best possible outcomes, everyone in the world has a coach. Everyone has to pay a price for achieving the best outcomes that they can. If you look at arguably the greatest tennis player of all time, Roger Federer, he has a coach or had a coach to achieve greatness. You look at Tiger Woods, he's had multiple different coaches. He was prepared to pay whatever he had to be the best and maximize, his outcomes. I think the same goes with Bitcoin. There's a lot of things that we know that we just can't convey in a 40-minute conversation on YouTube that we'd love to share with our clients. And I think working with us long term and paying the fee that is will more than offset any cost of doing business with us. And this is where what we're talking about today is just the tip of the iceberg, but ensuring not only that you're able to understand these concepts, but that you actually implement the concepts. That's where the real value comes in, actually having someone to hold you accountable for achieving the things that you said you wanted to.
Yeah, obviously I'm biased too. But yeah, I agree with that. The thing I like to explain to people is that, maybe they do think 0.5% is expensive for literally dozens and dozens of benefits. Today being kind of touching on 2 or 3 of those benefits. Maybe they think that's expensive, but I think that there are 2 assumptions along with that. The first assumption, 0.5% in a 4-year Bitcoin cycle is 2%. I think the first assumption someone has to make is that in any given Bitcoin cycle, that they're going to lose less than 2% of their Bitcoin to the sum total of risks to their Bitcoin. And those add up pretty quick. When someone has a lawsuit thrown at them, they might lose 10% of their coins. When someone loses one of their private keys, they might lose, a third of their Bitcoin, right? So that's the first assumption, is people have to assume they're going to lose less than 2% of their Bitcoin in a given Bitcoin cycle. And the second thing they have to assume is that we provide less than 2% of value per Bitcoin cycle. And if those 2 things are true, then yes, 0.5% is expensive. But if either one of those things is not true, then I would challenge that assumption that paying a small tangible cost for an invaluable service is expensive. So that's just my 2 cents. But of course, I'm biased. But yeah. Peter, thank you for your time. I know you got to go here and that we're kind of up here, but any final words, parting words for people to consider when they're debating if they should start taking this stuff seriously or not, or if they're too late to Bitcoin or not?
In respect to, are you too late to Bitcoin? Absolutely not. The party hasn't started yet. So please take action and get involved. I am envious of the fact that anyone who's out there who hasn't got into Bitcoin yet, all of the things they're going to experience, having done that, because everyone in Bitcoin to this date follows a pretty similar path. So I'm extremely excited for what lies ahead of all those who haven't bought Bitcoin yet. And for anyone who has and looking at their stack and thinking about having a chat to us, I would urge you to take action. It's much easier doing it now than before at 10x's, and the consequences of getting it right now versus later could be significant. So reach out to Luke, book a time, and let's at least have a conversation and see if there's any benefit that we might be able to deliver to you.
Thank you, Peter. Appreciate it. With our team of 40 people that do this full-time helping clients with this, I'm curious, how much longer do you think are we going to be able to onboard as many new people as possible? Because, obviously, we can't serve the whole world with a team of 40, probably soon to be 50 people. But to me, the biggest concern is if Bitcoin does a 10x, right? It's like, as excited as I am about Bitcoin 100K, I'm a bit worried of it going up too fast. So what, I don't know, what do you think is going to be the optimal path here for helping as many people as possible? Because I'd rather the price go down. I'd rather go back down to 70K for a while.
Yeah. I just think it's a big task in front of us. And as that price continues to increase, it's going to cause more and more anxiety for people who are self-custodying, who haven't locked down all of the things that we've discussed. But I think, Luke, you have a very optimistic disposition. So we're just going to continue doing what we do as best we can and try and service as many people as possible. But it's a very daunting thought because we know what's happening and we're already, it feels like at capacity at this point in time. So to anyone listening, thinking about it, I would urge action before it just gets outrageously busy. So,
all right. Thank you, Peter. Maybe last time we had this conversation in a very similar vibe to this, Bitcoin is 40K. So at this rate, maybe next time we'll have this, Peter, it'll be 200K, or I guess it'll be 250K on percentage terms. So until 250K, thank you, Peter. Talk to you next time.
Look forward to it. Cheers.